Welcome back to AP U.S. History. This video from Chapter 9 will be exploring Jefferson's presidency. He was the third president. There's going to be a transition of power from the Federalists to the Democratic Republicans, and we'll look at that as we go through this video. Jefferson was a very wealthy man, author of the Declaration of Independence, slave owner. Believed that slaves were never going to be equal to whites, so he was somewhat of a racist. During his inaugural speech, he held out the olive branch to the Federalists and said, well, we're all just one people, Republicans and Federalists, we're all just one. And so that's how he'll proceed with his presidency. The Federalists will surrender power. And Jefferson will come into power as president and also have a Democratic-Republican Congress. As much as Hamilton's plans were criticized by Jefferson, he leaves most of them intact. Assuming state debts, he kept that in place. He felt that would be a good way for the states to become more loyal to the national government. Here shows the electoral vote in 1800 when he defeated Adams, who only served for 4 years. Once the Federalists were out, they never regained power. He also kept the tariff in place. The Bank of the U.S. was kept intact, a key component to Hamilton's financial plan. Some of the policies that were reversed, he did release the 10 Republican editors who had been serving jail sentences for things they had written about Adams and the Federalist Congress. He removed the excise tax on alcohol. The naturalization law was changed in 1802. Under the Alien Act, it took 14 years to become a citizen. Now it's reduced back to 5. He succeeded in lowering the national debt and balancing the budget. One of his famous quotes, the government that governs least governs best. So he was trying to downsize the power of the federal government. He believed in states' rights, and he wanted them to have more power in this new government. Everyone should be a farmer. He was against cities, and he was against the Industrial Revolution in a sense. He didn't believe that the model in Europe was necessarily working all that well. He reduced the size of the army but increased the navy because there were some problems in the Mediterranean. The 12th Amendment was added during his presidency simply because there was some confusion as to how the Electoral College voted. It was intended that Burr would be his vice president and he would be the president, but when they cast the ballots, they didn't differentiate that, and so both men received 73 electoral votes. And so there's going to be a dilemma as to who is going to be the president. Eventually, the House of Representatives elects Jefferson to be president, and then in 1804, another amendment is added so that this will never happen again. John Marshall is going to be Jefferson's biggest opponent in the judicial branch. He believes in a federalist system. Most of his decisions that were rendered favor the federal government. And this doesn't set well with Jefferson. And there's going to be some problems. One of the last things that John Adams does is that he appoints John Marshall as the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. On the outgoing Congress, Federalists passed the Judicial Act of 1801, which created 16 new judges. Adams appointed these judges. They were all Federalist judges, believing in a strong central government. They are often called the Midnight Judges because they were done on the last day of his presidency, before the stroke of midnight, and then he was no longer president. The Jeffersonians cry foul. They say the Federalists have packed the courts with their own people, that philosophy of a strong central government. One of the first things that the new Congress does under the Democratic Republicans is repeal the act. So they take away the 16 judges. Now, John Marshall is going to maintain the Federalist principles in most of his decisions, which ruffles the feathers of Jefferson. Now, the court case that you'll need to know is Mulberry versus Madison, 1803, is asked frequently on the AP exam. The Midnight Judges, with Mulberry, who sued for his commission, the writ of mandamus. He wanted to become a judge, but Jefferson was holding it up. He was intended to be a justice of the peace in the District of Columbia, but he never receives his appointment. James Madison, who's the Secretary of State, is told by Jefferson not to let him become a judge in the District of Columbia. This matter is eventually going to be settled by the Supreme Court. So James Madison, who became the fourth president, holds up their appointment. Now, John Marshall knows that if he rules in favor of Mulberry and says that he should become a judge, that probably Jefferson will never enforce that ruling. So he wisely dismisses the case, and Mulberry never receives his commission. He says in his ruling that this judicial act a part of it was not constitutional. And so it seems like Jefferson has won the day, and there's not going to be a showdown between the judicial and executive branches. But the principle of judicial review will be established because of this case. And what was that? Well, the federal courts now have the ultimate authority to decide whether an executive or legislative action is unconstitutional. And this is going to increase the power of the courts. Jefferson is furious, but there's nothing he can do about it. So the power of the Supreme Court is enhanced. The next step that the Jeffersonians try to implore is to get rid of Samuel Chase. They say he's incompetent and he shows favoritism, and so they want to impeach him, that is, bring charges of misconduct against him. Jefferson goes along with that because he wants to exert his power over the courts. He wants to appoint judges that are from his persuasion, his philosophy. Samuel Chase got kind of a raw deal, but he's eventually acquitted by the Senate, and the upshot of this is that the Jeffersonians never attempt again to try to remove judges from the court system. And so I guess this upholds the separation of power and making sure that the judicial branch is independent. Tripolitan Wars are going to break out and last for 4 years. They were started by the pirates off of North Africa, who were seizing American commercial ships and sailors and holding them for ransom. This shows where the Barbary Coast is located on the Mediterranean, from Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, all the way over to Egypt. And these pirates operated from these ports and seized American ships. Here shows the Philadelphia being run aground in 1803 during the middle of the war, and it was later destroyed by the Americans by a lieutenant named Stephen Decatur, and he denies the pirates access to the ship. He becomes a national hero, but doesn't really do much with that except stay in the military. Jefferson is forced to take military action because he says he's not going to pay a bribe to these pirates off northern Africa, Algiers, Tripoli, Morocco, Tunis. Not going to do it. When we were under the protection of the British, they paid the ransom. When the Federalists were in power, they paid a ransom, but he says, "Nah, we're not going to pay any more ransom to these cutthroats." In 1801, the Pasha of Tripoli decides that he will declare war on the United States. When it's all said and done, America disagrees to pay a smaller bribe. So the war really didn't accomplish much, partly because we didn't really have the Navy to defend ourselves. So after 4 years, the peace treaty will be signed, and we will pay a smaller bribe. Now we come to the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. In 1800, Napoleon induced Spain to give the Louisiana region to France. France in 1802 withdrew all the U.S. rights of depositing things in New Orleans, which we had gotten under the Pinckney Treaty. This shows the area that will be purchased north of Texas along the Rocky Mountains to the Canadian border. It doubles the size of the United States. So we're in a pretty ticklish position. We're in a position that's a no-win situation. We need to use the Mississippi. Jefferson's going to send a delegation to try to buy New Orleans so that we can get our rights to ship things down the Mississippi into other places and be stored in New Orleans. Monroe and Livingston are the two that are sent. They're instructed to buy Louisiana or New Orleans for $10 million. Napoleon, who is fighting a war in Europe, needs money desperately to finance his troops. And the fact that he has a setback in Haiti convinces him that he's probably going to lose the Louisiana Territory anyway, so why not just sell it to the Americans? So the offer is $10 million for New Orleans. And when they get there, Livingston is the U.S. minister to France, negotiates a Louisiana Purchase for $15 million. So for $5 more million, they get all this territory, and it's going to double the size of the United States. One of the setbacks that the French had was their defeat in Haiti, and thousands of troops are killed. The French knew that if they failed to negotiate with the United States, that possibly we might become the Great Britain's ally. So they're willing to sell the Louisiana Territory to the United States. And of course, Napoleon needs the money to finance the war. The French does not need another enemy in North America, so they agree to buy the whole thing for $15 million. Jefferson reluctantly accepts the treaty when he finds out when they come back from France, but he agrees, and they send it to the Senate, which agrees, and they decide to pay Napoleon $15 million. Jefferson believes that his action was unconstitutional, but goes along with it anyway. Treaty is ratified, and now we're going to take a look at the Louisiana Territory and Lewis and Clark, and we'll stop right here.